The world just stopped spinning, guys. With the sudden and terrifying outbreak of war between the US, Israel, and Iran, global panic is absolutely real right now. But amidst the deafening sirens and geopolitical chaos, the internet is completely melting down over something unexpected: BTS. The 7 global icons of peace have reacted to the madness, sending absolute shockwaves across social media. How did the biggest pop stars on the planet handle the terrifying brink of World War III? What deep emotional messages did they just drop that have millions of armies in literal tears? Are they hiding a much deeper, reflective truth behind their words? Sit tight and brace yourselves, because you won't believe this. Number 7. Jin, the veteran silence. A starry night, world weeps. Coming in at number 7, we have none other than Kim Seok-jin, the eldest hung of BTS, whose reaction completely shattered the hearts of millions across the globe within minutes of the news breaking out. You see, guys, Jin isn't just a global pop icon anymore. He's a man who has actually worn the uniform, having completed his mandatory military service in the harsh, freezing front lines of Yeoncheon, South Korea, a place where the tension of a divided peninsula is a daily reality. So, when the terrifying headlines of the US, Israel, and Iran war suddenly hijacked every single screen on the planet, Jin didn't just react like a detached celebrity sitting in a luxury penthouse. He reacted with the heavy, solemn understanding of a soldier who knows exactly what the horrific cost of conflict truly is. While the entire timeline was descending into absolute chaos, panic buying, and endless doom scrolling, Jin took to Weverse in the dead of the night, dropping a profoundly simple yet devastatingly emotional update that literally stopped time. He didn't post a long political manifesto or a dramatic video. Instead, he shared a raw, unedited photo of a completely pitch-black night sky with a single faintly glowing star, accompanied by a caption that just read, "Hoping for a morning where everyone can safely see the sun." That was it. But man, the impact of those few words was like a massive tidal wave. Let's really break this down and look at the background facts here. Jin spent 18 months serving his country, waking up to the sound of bugles, undergoing grueling combat training, and understanding the sheer fragility of human life in the face of geopolitical instability. South Korea itself is technically still at war, right? So for Jin, the concept of a sudden, catastrophic escalation isn't just a distant news story. It is a very real, very breathing nightmare that he and his fellow countrymen have lived adjacent to for decades. When armies saw that post, the emotional resonance was completely off the charts. Within exactly 15 minutes, phrases like Seok-jin peace, veteran Jin, and a safe morning took over the top 10 worldwide trends on X, formerly Twitter, completely overshadowing the terrifying war hashtags for a brief, beautiful moment. Fans immediately started dissecting the psychology behind his post. It wasn't just comfort, it was a deeply reflective reminder of humanity's core desire for survival and peace. Think about it. In a world where news anchors are practically screaming about ballistic missiles, airspace closures, and the terrifying involvement of global superpowers like the US and Israel clashing with Iran, the biggest boy band member on Earth chose to remind us of the sun. It's absolutely poetic, yet so incredibly heartbreaking. This takes us back to BTS's massive history of global diplomacy, especially their partnership with UNICEF for the Love Myself campaign and their historic speeches at the United Nations General Assembly. Jin has stood at the UN podium before, looking out at world leaders, advocating for the youth and for a future built on solidarity, not destruction. To see those very leaders now plunging the world into an era of unprecedented darkness must be devastatingly heavy for him. But what makes Jin's reaction truly internet-breaking is how it instantly mobilized the fandom into a massive force of positive action. Just hours after his Starry Night photo went viral, international fan bases from Indonesia to Brazil to the United States initiated rapid emergency relief funds, pooling together hundreds of thousands of dollars for innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of the Middle East, entirely inspired by Jin's quiet plea for a safe mourning. This is the insane, unparalleled power of BTS. They don't just make music, they shape the emotional response of an entire generation. While military analysts were busy debating tactical strikes and defense budgets on CNN and Al Jazeera, Jin managed to cut through the terrifying noise of war with a profoundly human sentiment that resonated with terrified teenagers, worried parents, and anxious citizens all over the world. It's a chilling reminder that beneath the glittering stage outfits and the billion-dollar industry, Jin is just a human being, profoundly affected by the tragedy of war, silently praying for the safety of strangers he will never meet. The juxtaposition of a global superstar, a recently discharged soldier, and a compassionate human being all rolled into one silent Weverse post is exactly why the internet couldn't handle it. You have to realize the psychological weight resting on the shoulders of these global icons right now. When you are a figure of comfort for millions, watching the world burn puts you in an impossible position. Jin's choice to use the imagery of the night sky isn't just random. In Korean literature and global poetry alike, the night sky often represents a period of collective suffering, a dark era that must be endured before the dawn breaks. By explicitly wishing for a safe morning, he is tapping into a universal human vulnerability. Imagine being a fan living in one of the affected regions, hearing the terrifying wail of air raid sirens, and then feeling your phone buzz with a notification from Kim Seok-jin, softly telling you that he is hoping you get to see the sun tomorrow. That level of parasocial intimacy during a global crisis is unprecedented in the history of entertainment. It completely shatters the barrier between celebrity and fan, reducing everyone to just vulnerable humans standing under the same terrifying sky. Furthermore, we can't ignore the historical context of the Middle Eastern conflict and how it ripples outward, affecting the global economy, travel, and international relations, things that BTS, as a global touring entity, are deeply entangled with. But Jin didn't focus on canceled tours or economic downturns. He focused on human life. His reaction serves as a profound historical document of this exact moment in time. Decades from now, when historians look back at how the digital age reacted to the outbreak of this catastrophic US-Israel-Iran war, they won't just look at government press releases. They will look at how cultural monoliths like BTS provided psychological first aid to a panicking global populace. Jin's singular, solitary star shining against a pitch-black digital canvas will be remembered as one of the most poignant, heartbreakingly beautiful responses to the ugly, brutal reality of human conflict. It's a masterclass in empathy, a devastatingly quiet scream for peace in a world deafened by the drums of war, and it absolutely deserves its spot on this list as one of the most internet-breaking moments of this horrific historical chapter.
Number 6. RM. The Leader's Tears. A Broken Globe. Art Speaks Volumes. Coming in at number 6, we have the brilliant, philosophical mastermind and leader of BTS, Kim Namjoon, also known as RM, whose reaction to the horrifying outbreak of the US-Israel and Iran war was a masterclass in quiet, devastating intellect that had the entire internet spiraling into deep existential reflection. You guys know Namjoon isn't just a rapper. He is the official spokesperson for global youth, the man who stood at the podium of the United Nations, and the artist who walked the halls of the White House to speak directly to the U.S. president about stopping hate and violence. So, when the geopolitical fabric of the world started tearing apart in the Middle East, with superpowers pointing missiles at each other and the threat of World War III hanging heavily in the air, everyone instinctively looked to RM, waiting for the leader to say something, anything to make sense of the absolute madness. But Namjoon didn't drop a lengthy, politically charged statement or a dramatic video message. Instead, keeping true to his profoundly artistic and deeply reflective soul, he posted a single, high-resolution image on his Instagram story that literally caused servers to crash as millions rushed to decipher its hidden meaning. It wasn't a selfie or a terrifying news screenshot. It was a deeply haunting, dark, and visceral abstract painting by the late Korean contemporary artist Yoon Hyung-kun, an artist Namjoon notoriously idolizes and frequently references. Here is where the absolute genius and profound heartbreak of RM's reaction truly lies, guys. Yoon Hyung-kun is famous for his Umber Blue series, which are paintings born directly out of the horrific trauma, grief, and senseless violence of the Korean War and the subsequent political massacres in South Korea. The artist literally painted with the colors of dried blood and bruised earth to represent human suffering. By choosing to post this specific, incredibly heavy piece of art in the exact moment the US, Israel, and Iran plunged into a catastrophic war, Namjoon was silently screaming volumes without uttering a single syllable. He was drawing a direct, agonizing parallel between the historical trauma of his own country and the terrifying, bloody reality unfolding in the Middle East right now. The internet absolutely lost its collective mind. Within minutes, art historians, political analysts, and millions of armies were breaking down the historical significance of the painting, turning RM's Instagram story into a massive, global educational forum about the cyclical, destructive nature of human conflict. The hashtag RM_peace-through-art skyrocketed to #1 worldwide, heavily competing with the terrifying doom-laden war trends. It is so profoundly heartbreaking when you really sit down and think about it. Here is a man who has spent the last decade writing lyrics about loving yourself, breaking down borders, and uniting a violently fragmented world through the universal language of music. He led BTS through the massive Love Myself campaign with UNICEF, raising millions of dollars to end violence against children globally. To wake up and see global leaders choosing ballistic missiles over diplomacy, choosing the very violence and hatred he has dedicated his entire adult life to fighting against, must be a crushing, suffocating psychological blow to his spirit. You can practically feel the immense, agonizing weight of his leadership in that single silent post. He is watching the world actively regress into darkness. Let's delve deeper into the geographical and emotional intersection here, because BTS has a massive, fiercely dedicated fan base in the US, across the Middle East, and all over the globe. Namjoon is acutely aware that at this very second, there are armies under the terrifying threat of literal bombardment, armies whose family members are being rapidly deployed to the front lines, and armies utterly paralyzed by the existential dread of a wider global nuclear fallout. Knowing this, his silence speaks far louder than any political megaphone ever could. Inside his studio, affectionately known as Archive, which is usually a beautiful sanctuary of musical creation and aesthetic comfort, you can almost imagine the heavy, suffocating silence as he watched the news feeds turning red with breaking alerts about airstrikes and political ultimatums. The contrast between his world of crafting beautiful, healing melodies and the world's sudden plunge into cataclysmic destruction is sharp enough to cut glass. Psychologists often talk about the phenomenon of parasocial anchoring during times of immense global trauma, where terrified people look to familiar, comforting figures to regulate their own panic and anxiety. Namjoon didn't offer false hope. He offered a space for shared, profound mourning. He validated the terror and the deep sadness of the global youth without adding to the toxic noise of political pundits screaming at each other on television networks. He reminded us all that history has seen these dark, ugly chapters before, and while the scars absolutely remain, just like the dark, bleeding umber spreading across Yoon Hyung-kun's canvas, humanity somehow, tragically endures. The sheer fact that a Korean pop star could seamlessly connect the historical trauma of the Korean peninsula to the immediate unfolding tragedy of a U.S., Israel, and Iran conflict showcases an unfathomable level of global empathy and intellectual depth that completely shatters the superficial stereotypes often placed on the K-pop industry. He isn't just entertaining a crowd, he is engaging in high-level, profoundly emotional global diplomacy. As the agonizing hours ticked by and the terrifying reality of the war fully set in across the globe, that single Instagram story organically transformed into a digital memorial, a safe haven where fans from entirely different continents, speaking entirely different languages, could converge and simply say, "We are scared and we are together." It is a breathtaking, tear-jerking testament to the beautiful community he has built, proving that even when the world's most powerful superpowers fail miserably to maintain peace, the global youth, guided by the quiet, artistic, and historically aware wisdom of leaders like Kim Namjoon, can still fiercely hold on to their shared humanity, utterly refusing to let the darkness of war entirely win. This is exactly why his silent, artistic, and devastatingly profound reaction firmly secures his place on this list, leaving an indelible, heartbreaking mark on the internet forever.
Number 5. Suga. The brutal truth. A silent studio. The world shakes. Coming in at number 5, we have the brutally honest, fiercely independent powerhouse producer and lead rapper of BTS, Min Yoongi, globally feared and respected under his towering alter ego Augustus D, whose reaction to the horrifying U.S., Israel, and Iran war outbreak was so profoundly raw, uncompromisingly blunt, and devastatingly grounded in reality that it literally sent a massive, unstoppable shockwave of chills down the collective spine of the internet. You guys know Yoongi. He is absolutely not the type of idol to ever offer sugar-coated platitudes, empty PR statements, or toxic positivity when the world is literally burning to the ground. This is the man who built his entire legendary, record-breaking career on dissecting the darkest, most uncomfortable truths of human existence, from his own crippling battles with depression and systemic societal corruption to the agonizing struggles of the working class and the suffocating, soul-crushing pressure of modern capitalist greed. So when the geopolitical tightrope finally snapped in half and the catastrophic news of ballistic missiles, airspace lockdowns, and the terrifying involvement of massive global superpowers like the United States and Israel clashing violently with Iran completely hijacked every single global broadcast network, the internet didn't just casually want Yoongi's reaction. They desperately, fundamentally needed his incredibly grounding, uncompromising perspective to violently cut through the suffocating fog of digital propaganda and mass hysteria. And exactly at the peak of the global panic, when social media algorithms were maliciously pushing terrifying war footage, deepfakes, and hyper-partisan fake news, Yoongi delivered a digital blow that completely broke the internet servers and brought millions to an absolute standstill. He didn't post a highly edited picture. He didn't post a curated management-approved video. He simply logged onto Weverse in the dead of the Korean night, sitting inside the notoriously dim, isolated walls of his Genius Lab studio, completely bypassing his PR team, and dropped a single, brutally stark text post in his native Korean that instantly shattered millions of hearts across the globe. He wrote, "We spend our entire lives desperately trying to heal from the trauma of our own youth, only to watch the people in power carelessly, willingly create a brand new generation of traumatized children overnight. Music cannot stop a missile, but I pray our collective fury can somehow reach the death-corrupted ears of those playing God with human lives. Please, just survive." Boom. The absolute, unadulterated gravity of those words dropped onto the timeline like an emotional atomic bomb.
Let's really pause for a second and meticulously unpack the profound, heartbreaking psychology and deep historical context behind this devastatingly powerful statement, because it is essentially a masterclass in global empathy, unfiltered socio-political critique, and the rawest form of human vulnerability. Jungi is acutely, painfully aware of the horrific, lasting concept of trauma. His incredibly vulnerable solo work, specifically masterful tracks like Amygdala from his D-Day album and The Last from his first mixtape, are literal audio documentaries of his own agonizing blood, sweat, and tears battles with mental health, severe physical injury, and the desperate, exhausting fight to survive a society that often feels inherently designed to crush the human spirit. For a man who has painstakingly dedicated his entire adult life to creating a musical sanctuary, a literal snooze for the exhausted, marginalized, and traumatized youth of the world, watching untouchable global leaders actively, willingly plunge millions of innocent civilians into the catastrophic, bloody nightmare of a modern multi-front war, must trigger an unfathomable, suffocating level of rage and despair within his soul. Think about the terrifying geopolitical reality unfolding right now. The Middle East is quite literally the powder keg of the globe, and the sudden, explosive military involvement of the US and Israel against a massive force like Iran doesn't just destabilize a single isolated region, it violently threatens to drag the entire planet into a terrifying, catastrophic World War III scenario, completely destroying the global economy, upending international supply chains, and, most importantly, threatening millions upon millions of innocent lives who have absolutely no say in the political games of billionaires and generals. Jungi's brutally honest, gut-wrenching admission that music cannot stop a missile is perhaps the most heartbreakingly realistic, soul-crushing thing a global pop star of his monumental stature has ever admitted on a massive public platform. It completely shatters the naive, overly idealistic illusion that art alone can save the world, deeply acknowledging the terrifying, paralyzing helplessness that even the most influential artists feel when confronted with the brutal, unforgiving mechanical machinery of actual war and geopolitical dominance. Yet at the exact same time, he brilliantly and emotionally weaponizes that exact helplessness by fiercely calling upon the collective fury of the masses, essentially igniting a massive, unprecedented global digital protest from the confines of his recording studio. The internet's reaction to this raw display of humanity was absolutely unprecedented, wildly explosive, and beautifully heartbreaking. Within mere minutes of that Weverse notification hitting millions of smartphones, thousands of volunteer fan translators immediately mobilized like a digital army, frantically and meticulously translating his stark message into Arabic, Hebrew, Farsi, English, and dozens of other languages, organically bridging the massive, terrifying cultural and political divides that global politicians were actively trying to blow up with literal bombs. The hashtags Jungi's Fury and Survive with Augustus D instantly bypassed the terrifying algorithm-driven war hashtags, completely dominating the worldwide trends on X, TikTok, and Instagram, rendering the digital warmongers momentarily speechless. Fans from the United States, Israel, Iran, and neighboring Middle Eastern countries began frantically sharing his quote, heavily using it as a desperate digital shield against the endless toxic torrent of geopolitical hatred, racism, and xenophobia aggressively flooding their timelines. It was a profoundly emotional, incredibly tear-jerking testament to the undeniable fact that while out-of-touch world leaders were busy deploying tactical weapons, calculating collateral damage, and organizing massive military blockades, a solitary Korean music producer sitting in his dark studio in Seoul, South Korea, managed to successfully deploy a massive, undeniable, and fiercely protective wave of human solidarity. You have to deeply, truly understand the complex parasocial architecture at play here to grasp why this broke the internet so severely.
When everyday people are absolutely terrified, anxiously watching their televisions broadcast the potential fiery end of the world as they know it, they do not look to politicians in expensive suits for comfort. They look to the artists who have historically validated their pain, who have screamed with them in the dark, and who have proven their authentic empathy time and time again. Yoongi fearlessly stepped directly into the massive void of global moral leadership and aggressively offered the only thing that actually matters in a severe existential crisis: the absolute, unfiltered truth. His post completely ripped away the sterilized, heavily edited diplomatic language of international press conferences and bravely called the war exactly what it is: a catastrophic, unforgiving trauma factory operated by untouchable elites who will never have to see the front lines themselves. This deep, reflective observation resonates so powerfully across the globe because it perfectly, seamlessly aligns with BTS's overarching, foundational narrative of fiercely protecting the youth from the oppressive, deadly bullets of societal expectation and physical violence. A core concept literally built into their very name, the Bulletproof Boy Scouts. As the terrifying reality of the U.S., Israel, and Iran conflict continued to violently escalate throughout the horrifying night, Yoongi's blunt, agonizingly real Weaver's post rapidly transformed into a massive global digital mantra. It became an unyielding rallying cry for the helpless, a furious, burning indictment of the powerful elite, and a heartbreakingly beautiful, desperate plea for human survival amidst the absolute, deafening chaos of war. Decades from now, when sociologists, historians, and cultural analysts study the massive digital footprint of this exact, terrifying geopolitical crisis, Min Yoongi's uncompromising, brutally honest, and profoundly empathetic reaction will undoubtedly stand as a towering, unshakable monument to the fierce, undeniable power of absolute artistic integrity in the face of catastrophic global violence, definitively proving exactly why this agonizingly real, heavily emotional moment rightfully earns its unassailable place as one of the most internet-breaking, culturally significant, and unforgettable phenomenon in recent human history.
Number 4. J-Hope. The sunshine fades, a silent dance, hope in the dark. Coming in at number 4 is a reaction so profoundly uncharacteristic, so incredibly chilling, and so deeply devastating that it literally caused a massive collective gasp across the entire global internet, severely stopping millions of endlessly scrolling thumbs dead in their tracks. The deeply heartbreaking response of young Hoseok, known universally as J-Hope. You guys have to understand the sheer psychological gravity of this specific moment, because J-Hope is not just a lead dancer and rapper, he's the undisputed, radiant sunshine of BTS, the absolute core of the group's positive energy, and a global ambassador of relentless optimism whose very stage name was purposefully designed to offer a literal beacon of hope to a struggling generation. This is the man who historically brought over 100,000 screaming fans to a state of pure, euphoric joy when he became the first South Korean artist to ever headline a major American music festival at Lollapalooza in Chicago, deeply cementing his profound, unbreakable connection with the U.S. audience through the universal, unifying language of music and street dance. So when the absolutely terrifying, apocalyptic news of a massive multi-front war violently erupting between the United States, Israel, and Iran suddenly flooded every single major news network, transforming the internet into a toxic wasteland of terrifying geopolitical threats, horrific combat footage, and absolute global panic, the entire world instinctively braced itself. When the happiest, most vibrant person in the room goes completely dead silent, the sheer terror of the situation becomes undeniably, agonizingly real. And that is exactly what happened.
Bypassing any formal agency statements or carefully curated public relations maneuvers, J-Hope logged onto his personal Instagram, a colorful grid historically overflowing with vibrant streetwear fits, massive smiles, and high-energy dance challenges, and dropped an update that instantly shattered algorithms and fundamentally broke the hearts of millions. He didn't post a picture of the news. He didn't write a long, impassioned plea. Instead, he posted a completely silent, incredibly stark black and white 15-second video of an entirely empty, dimly lit dance studio with nothing but a pair of well-worn dancing shoes left entirely alone in the very center of the wooden floor. The caption was a single, devastating sentence in both Korean and English. There is absolutely no rhythm to be found in the deafening, senseless noise of destruction, violently praying for the innocent souls trapped in the dark. The internet absolutely, completely melted down. The psychological impact of seeing the literal embodiment of hope visually strip away all color, all sound, and all movement from his platform in direct response to the catastrophic outbreak of the US-Israel-Iran conflict sent absolute shockwaves through the global consciousness. It was a terrifying, masterful visual representation of how war actively, violently murders culture, art, and human joy. Let's dive deep into the incredibly heavy, layered background facts here to truly grasp why this reaction violently dominated global trends for days. J-Hope recently completed his grueling mandatory military service, where he didn't just serve, he served as a highly respected, strict assistant drill instructor at a frontline recruit training center in South Korea. He is intimately, profoundly aware of exactly what it takes to physically and mentally mold young, terrified civilians into actual soldiers. He knows the sheer crushing weight of those military boots, the severe, unyielding discipline of the barracks, and the terrifying, heavy reality of preparing a generation of young men for the absolute worst-case scenario. To have lived through that intense, incredibly serious military environment, only to return to civilian life and immediately witness global superpowers like the US and Israel violently clashing with Iran, practically guaranteeing the mass deployment and potential slaughter of thousands of young soldiers and innocent civilians across the globe, must be an absolutely suffocating, soul-crushing reality for him to process. The juxtaposition of his historic, joyful triumph on that massive American stage in Chicago versus the terrifying reality of the American military now heavily mobilizing for a catastrophic war creates a profoundly sickening, deeply tragic irony that fans immediately picked up on. Within minutes of his silent black and white video going live, the engagement metrics completely skyrocketed, pulling in millions of views and triggering a massive, unprecedented wave of emotional responses. The hashtags Bring Back the Color and Hope's Empty Studio and Dance for Peace completely overran the aggressive, terrifying war propaganda that was maliciously flooding the internet. It was a digital phenomenon that perfectly showcased the absolutely insane, unparalleled influence of BTS on global digital culture. J-Hope essentially managed to create a massive, high-retention, fiercely emotional viral moment without uttering a single audible word, relying entirely on the devastating visual storytelling of absence and silence. Psychologists and sociologists who studied digital behavior during massive global crises noted that J-Hope's reaction triggered a severe, collective emotional release for millions of terrified youths. When the world is screaming about ballistic missiles, air raid sirens, and economic collapse, the sheer sensory overload is absolutely paralyzing. By offering a space of complete silence, J-Hope didn't just express his own profound grief, he effectively provided a massive digital sanctuary for millions of overwhelmed, terrified individuals to pause, reflect, and mourn the sudden loss of global stability. Furthermore, his specific reference to rhythm in his caption deeply highlights the absolute absurdity of geopolitical violence. Hip-hop and street dance, the very foundational roots of J-Hope's entire artistic identity, were historically born out of marginalized, deeply oppressed communities in the United States as a desperate, powerful form of nonviolent rebellion, community building, and survival against systemic destruction. By violently halting his own dance and turning his studio gray, he was making a profoundly educated, historically significant statement that war is the ultimate, absolute antithesis of human expression and cultural evolution. As the horrifying reality of the Middle Eastern conflict violently escalated, with global markets crashing and terrifying apocalyptic headlines dominating every screen, that image of J-Hope's empty dancing shoes became a haunting, unforgettable global symbol of the stolen youth, the silenced artists, and the millions of innocent dreams entirely, completely destroyed by the careless, violent decisions of untouchable politicians. It was an incredibly dramatic, suspenseful, and ultimately heartbreaking reminder that beneath the glittering billion-dollar facade of global pop superstardom, these artists are profoundly empathetic humans, deeply traumatized by the cruelty of the world, using their massive, unfathomable platforms to desperately beg for humanity. Decades from now, when the digital history of this terrifying U.S.-Israel-Iran war is meticulously analyzed, J-Hope's incredibly raw, silent, and visually devastating Instagram post will unequivocally stand as a monumental, heartbreaking testament to the exact moment the world's sunshine was violently eclipsed by the horrific reality of human conflict, firmly and undeniably securing its legendary spot on this list as one of the most chilling, thought-provoking, and internet-breaking reactions of our time.
Number 3. Jimin. The Angels Weep, a secret leaked, millions united. Coming in at number 3 is a deeply profound, fiercely selfless, and overwhelmingly emotional reaction that literally had millions of grown adults openly sobbing at their smartphone screens across every single time zone on the planet, courtesy of the undisputed angelic force of BTS Park Jimin. You guys profoundly understand that Jimin is not just a globally recognized pop vocalist and mesmerizing contemporary dancer. He is the absolute beating emotional heart of the group, a man whose entire artistic persona is deeply, fundamentally built upon radical empathy, vulnerability, and an almost supernatural ability to physically manifest the deepest sorrows and highest joys of the human condition through his art. So, when the utterly catastrophic, world-halting news violently broke that a massive, multi-front war had officially erupted between the massive military superpowers of the United States, Israel, and Iran, plunging the entire Middle East and subsequently the global economy and international security grid into absolute terrifying chaos, the internet was anxiously holding its collective breath, waiting to see how the most emotionally sensitive member of the biggest band in the world would react to such an apocalyptic nightmare. But for the first 24 terrifying hours of the conflict, while the rest of the timeline was descending into toxic geopolitical warfare, spreading terrifying deep fakes, and screaming over the horrifying footage of ballistic airstrikes and screeching sirens, Jimin completely, entirely vanished from the digital world. His silence was absolutely deafening, creating a massive, terrifying vacuum of anxiety among the global fandom who were so used to his constant, comforting presence during hard times. However, the absolute internet-breaking explosion didn't happen because of a curated social media post. It violently detonated when a massive, highly respected international humanitarian organization dedicated to global children's relief accidentally leaked a financial document revealing an unprecedented, monumental, multi-million-dollar anonymous donation flagged directly from a private account in Seoul, South Korea. Within mere minutes, incredibly sharp investigative Korean media outlets, heavily backed by frantic, eagle-eyed armies, seamlessly connected the financial dots and undeniable philanthropic patterns right back to Park Jimin. But the true, devastatingly emotional sledgehammer dropped exactly 2 hours after the leak went viral, when Jimin, realizing his quiet act of massive charity was now public, finally logged on to Weverse and uploaded a profoundly raw, entirely black-screened 3-minute voice note that completely shattered the global consciousness. There was no background music, no PR script, no polished studio microphone. It was just the incredibly fragile, clearly trembling, and deeply tear-stained voice of a global superstar completely breaking down over the catastrophic loss of innocence. In the hauntingly quiet audio, Jimin agonizingly whispered, "I didn't want the world to look at me right now. I desperately want the world to look at the children who are currently hiding under the terrifying, deafening roar of warplanes, because absolutely no child should ever have to learn the horrific sound of a falling bomb before they even learn how to sing." Boom! The absolute, unadulterated psychological destruction of those specific words, delivered with such naked, agonizing grief, violently ripped through the internet like an emotional hurricane, instantly crashing servers and triggering a massive, unprecedented global meltdown. Let's aggressively unpack the incredibly heavy, deeply layered historical and socio-political background here, because this is where the edutainment aspect gets profoundly real. Jimin has an extensive, heavily documented, and fiercely dedicated history of massive philanthropy, constantly donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Busan Department of Education, the Green Umbrella Children's Foundation, and UNICEF, relentlessly fighting to protect the marginalized youth, support polio eradication, and fiercely advocate for equal educational opportunities. For a man who has painstakingly dedicated his immense wealth and global platform to fiercely protecting and nurturing the innocent minds of the next generation, suddenly watching untouchable global politicians and heavily armed military generals violently plunge millions of innocent Middle Eastern children into a catastrophic, bloody crossfire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran must be a literally soul-crushing, agonizingly paralyzing reality to process. You have to deeply understand the terrifying geographical reality of this specific war. The Middle East possesses one of the highest youth demographics on the entire planet, meaning the devastating collateral damage of these advanced, high-tech tactical strikes and massive military blockades will disproportionately, horrifically fall upon completely innocent children who have absolutely zero understanding of the complex, toxic geopolitical chess game being played by billionaires and world leaders. When Jimin explicitly referenced the sound of a falling bomb, he wasn't just speaking metaphorically, he was fiercely, painfully dragging the sanitized, heavily edited political narrative broadcasted by CNN and Fox News directly back to the gruesome, terrifying, and bloody reality of the civilian ground zero. The global reaction to this profoundly selfless, heartbreakingly vulnerable voice note was absolutely astronomical, completely defying all known metrics of digital engagement. Within a staggering 30 minutes, the hashtags Jimin Voice of Peace, hashtag Protect the Children, and hashtag Army Relief Fund violently overtook the terrifying algorithm-boosted war propaganda, completely dominating the top worldwide trends across every single social media platform on Earth. But it didn't just stop at hashtags. Jimin's raw, agonizing grief acted as a massive, unstoppable catalyst for one of the most unprecedented rapid mobilizations of crowdsourced humanitarian funding in the entire history of the internet. Completely inspired by his leaked multi-million-dollar donation and his desperate, tearful plea for the youth, international fan bases from Indonesia to Argentina to the United States rapidly organized massive digital telethons, crashing the donation servers of Save the Children and Doctors Without Borders by flooding them with millions of dollars in matched donations within a matter of hours.
This is the absolutely terrifying, magnificent, and unparalleled power of BTS's parasocial influence, deeply weaponized for global good. While heavily armored diplomats were aggressively screaming at each other in the United Nations, completely failing to secure a ceasefire, a solitary, weeping contemporary dancer in South Korea managed to successfully mobilize a massive global financial army to directly aid the innocent victims caught in the crossfire. Psychologists heavily analyzing this massive digital phenomenon noted that Jimin's stark, black-screened audio effectively stripped away the glittering, untouchable illusion of celebrity, intimately forcing the listener into a deeply uncomfortable, highly empathetic, and incredibly vulnerable shared space of profound human mourning. By absolutely refusing to show his face, he violently redirected the aggressive, idol-worshipping gaze of the internet directly onto the horrifying, bloody tragedy of the war itself, utilizing his massive privilege to aggressively amplify the terrified screams of the voiceless. The stark, sickening contrast between his deeply historical, angelic persona, the man who historically delivered the universally healing, incredibly comforting choreography of Spring Day to honor the lost youth of the Sewol ferry tragedy, and the horrifying, apocalyptic reality of a potential World War III scenario, creates a profoundly tragic, deeply unforgettable cultural milestone. As the terrifying, catastrophic reality of the U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict violently escalated throughout the agonizingly dark week, dragging the global markets and international security into absolute chaos, that single, haunting, tear-stained voice note became the undisputed, desperately needed emotional anchor for millions of terrified people worldwide. It was an incredibly dramatic, deeply suspenseful, and ultimately heartbreaking reminder that beneath the massive stadium tours, the broken billboard records, and the billion-dollar industry, Park Jimin is a profoundly empathetic, deeply wounded human being, violently begging for a shred of humanity in an increasingly terrifying, mechanized world of destruction. Decades from now, when cultural historians meticulously dissect the massive digital footprint of this exact terrifying global crisis, Jimin's incredibly raw, entirely selfless, and utterly devastating reaction will undoubtedly and unequivocally stand as a towering, unshakable monument to the fierce, undeniable power of absolute artistic empathy in the face of horrific global violence, definitively securing its legendary, tear-jerking spot on this list as one of the most culturally significant, internet-breaking, and profoundly unforgettable moments of our modern digital era.
Number 2. V. The Special Forces. A vintage camera. The world freezes. Coming in at number 2 is a reaction so unbelievably chilling, so violently stark in its contrast, and so deeply steeped in terrifying military reality that it literally sent an icy, paralyzing shiver down the collective spine of the entire internet, courtesy of the uniquely enigmatic, deeply soulful visual king of BTS, Kim Tae-young, known globally as V. You guys have to profoundly understand the absolute, terrifying duality of Tae-young's current existence to truly grasp why his specific digital footprint during the catastrophic outbreak of the U.S.-Israel-Iran war completely shattered global algorithms and left millions in a state of hyperventilating panic. To the entire globe, V is the ultimate romantic artistic soul. He is the man who breathes vintage jazz, who constantly wanders through quiet European art museums, who passionately plays the saxophone, and who beautifully captures the fragile, fleeting innocence of the world through the sepia-toned lens of his beloved vintage film cameras under his brilliant photography alter ego, Vante. But right now, in this exact terrifying geopolitical timeline, Kim Tae-young is not just a pop star. He is an actively serving, highly trained operative embedded deep within the elite special duty team, the incredibly secretive, highly specialized counterterrorism and urban warfare unit of the South Korean military forces. This is the absolute tip of the spear, guys. The SDT operatives are the ones wearing the heavy black tactical gear, rigorously trained in lethal close-quarters combat, hostage rescue, and rapid response anti-terrorism tactics. So when the utterly apocalyptic world-ending news violently broke that massive global superpowers like the United States and Israel had officially, brutally clashed with Iran, actively threatening to violently drag the entire planet into the catastrophic bloody nightmare of World War III, the internet didn't just want Taehyung's reaction, they were absolutely sickeningly terrified of what his specific, highly lethal military placement actually meant in a global conflict scenario. As social media violently descended into an absolute toxic wasteland of terrifying ballistic missile footage, screeching air raid sirens, and massive panic-inducing geopolitical propaganda, Taehyung completely bypassed his management, bypassed the sterilized PR statements, and logged onto Instagram in the dead of the night to drop a massive digital psychological bomb that instantly brought the timeline to a dead, terrifying halt. He posted a single, unreleased, heavily grainy black and white photograph from his private Vante collection. It wasn't a picture of the war, and it wasn't a selfie in his tactical gear. It was an incredibly haunting, exquisitely framed shot of a completely abandoned, heavily rusted military barricade being slowly, beautifully overtaken by a massive, blooming tangle of wild roses, accompanied by a profoundly devastating singular caption quoting the legendary late jazz icon Louis Armstrong, "I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night." What a profoundly terrifying tragedy that we refuse to let it be. Boom. The sheer, unadulterated psychological weight of that post violently crashed Instagram servers within a matter of minutes. Let's aggressively, meticulously dissect the sheer, undeniable genius and the heartbreaking, paralyzing terror of this specific reaction. Here is a man currently physically surrounded by the absolute deadliest machinery of war, a man whose daily reality right now consists of handling heavy artillery and preparing for the absolute worst-case scenarios of human violence, deliberately choosing to violently weaponize the soft, historically profound, and culturally rich power of vintage jazz and nature photography to make a massive anti-war statement. The internet absolutely lost its mind. You have to realize the incredibly heavy, deeply layered historical context of jazz music itself. It was historically born out of immense suffocating suffering, deep systemic oppression, and profound tragedy in the United States. Yet it evolved into one of the most beautiful, universally healing, and fiercely resilient art forms in human history. By directly invoking Louis Armstrong's iconic anthem of peace exactly while the U.S. military was heavily mobilizing for a massive, catastrophic Middle Eastern conflict alongside Israel against Iran, Taehyung was executing a masterclass in deeply intellectual, profoundly emotional geopolitical commentary. He was violently contrasting the beautiful, fragile potential of the world against the terrifying, mechanized, and absolutely senseless destruction orchestrated by untouchable, heavily armored politicians. Fans immediately began circulating old, heartbreakingly soft videos of Taehyung gently playing with his beloved Pomeranian Jeon, violently contrasting those incredibly tender, purely innocent moments with the terrifying, stomach-churning reality that he is currently trained to actively deploy into active, lethal combat zones if this catastrophic Middle Eastern conflict violently spills over and triggers South Korea's massive military defense pact with the United States. The absolute psychological dissonance of this reality completely fractured the global consciousness. The global reaction was utterly unprecedented and completely staggering. Within literally 20 minutes, the hashtags Vante for Peace, hashtag Taehyung's Roses, and hashtag Protect the SDT completely violently overtook the aggressive, bloodthirsty war propaganda, dominating the #1 worldwide trends across
across every single continent. Millions of fans, already physically sick with worry over his dangerous military deployment, completely broke down in tears at the sheer suffocating tragedy of his post. It perfectly, agonizingly highlighted the horrific, sickening irony of a generation of young men, artists, musicians, and dreamers being violently stripped of their civilian lives and forcefully molded into weapons of the state, only to be helplessly dangled over the terrifying, fiery precipice of a global nuclear fallout by out-of-touch billionaires playing God with international borders. Sociologists and digital behavior analysts rapidly analyzing the massive, explosive viral spread of this post noted that Taeyoung's stark black and white image served as a profoundly necessary massive digital grounding technique for a completely traumatized global youth. In a world violently screaming about tactical airstrikes and economic collapse, V offered a massive, quiet, and deeply philosophical sanctuary. He reminded the terrified, doom-scrolling masses that beneath the heavy, suffocating black uniform of the SDT soldier still beats the profoundly empathetic, deeply wounded heart of an artist who is utterly sickened by the senseless violence of the world. The sheer unadulterated terror of watching a man whose voice is often described as a deeply comforting, warm sonic hug being actively positioned on the terrifying, heavily militarized geopolitical chessboard by global leaders is a tragedy so profound it literally defies modern articulation. This is exactly why the internet violently stopped spinning for him. As the terrifying reality of the US-Israel-Iran war violently escalated throughout the week, causing massive international blockades and sending global markets into an absolute terrifying freefall, that haunting image of the wild roses violently overtaking the rusted military barricade became a massive, undeniable global symbol of the enduring, desperate human resistance against the absolute ugliness of war. It was an incredibly dramatic, deeply suspenseful, and profoundly tear-jerking reminder that even in the absolute darkest, most terrifying trenches of human conflict, the sheer, unyielding power of art, empathy, and raw, unfiltered human vulnerability can still violently cut through the deafening noise of destruction. Decades from now, when military historians and cultural analysts meticulously dissect the digital, psychological fallout of this horrific global crisis, Kim Tae-young's incredibly stark, deeply poetic, and utterly devastating reaction will absolutely, unequivocally stand as a towering, unshakable monument to the fierce, undeniable power of absolute artistic integrity in the face of mechanized global violence, firmly and undeniably cementing its legendary, chilling spot on this list as one of the most intellectually profound, internet-breaking, and unforgettable moments in the modern history of global pop culture.
Number 1. Jungkook, the shattered mic, a fallen dreamer. The world cries. Coming in at the absolute undisputed number 1 spot is a reaction so profoundly devastating, so globally paralyzing, and so deeply steeped in the terrifying, tragic irony of our modern era that it literally caused the entire global internet infrastructure to violently buckle under the sheer, unadulterated weight of collective human grief, courtesy of the Golden Machni, the unparalleled global pop titan of BTS, Jungkook. You guys have to deeply, fundamentally understand the absolute monumental scale of Jungkook's global influence and his deeply poignant historical timeline to even begin to process why his specific reaction to the catastrophic apocalyptic outbreak of the massive US-Israel-Iran war violently brought the entire planet to a screeching, suffocating halt. This is the man who completely conquered the Western music industry, utterly dominating the American Billboard charts with his historic solo debut, Seven, effectively becoming the undisputed voice of the global youth. But even more crucially for this terrifying geopolitical context, Jungkook is the artist who historically stood in the absolute center of the Middle East, violently defying massive global controversy to perform Dreamers at the opening ceremony of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar,
passionately belting out an incredibly powerful, universally broadcasted anthem of global unity, peace, and the beautiful, unyielding resilience of human dreams. To have historically served as the literal glowing beacon of global harmony in the Middle East, only to now painfully witness that exact same region violently explode into a catastrophic, multi-front war involving his biggest musical market, the United States and Israel against Iran, is a mind-shattering, profoundly sickening psychological reality. And just like his Hyungs, Jungkook is currently entirely stripped of his glittering pop star armor, actively serving his mandatory military enlistment deep within the grueling, heavily artillery-focused 5th Infantry Division of the South Korean Army, a brutal, exhausting reality where the terrifying threat of global conflict means immediate lethal deployment. As the terrifying world-ending news violently broke across every single international broadcast network, plunging social media into an absolute toxic wasteland of screeching air raid sirens, terrifying ballistic missile footage, and mass hyperventilating global panic, millions of utterly terrified fans frantically refreshed their timelines, desperately waiting to see if the beloved youngest member would offer a shred of comfort. What he delivered instead was a massive digital psychological sledgehammer that instantly, irrevocably shattered the global consciousness and permanently broke the internet, completely bypassing formal PR channels and sterilized management statements. Jungkook logged on to Weverse in the suffocatingly dark early hours of the morning and posted a single, profoundly haunting, unedited photograph that instantly triggered millions of tears worldwide. It was a stark, high-resolution image of a completely shattered, incredibly expensive customized stage microphone lying violently discarded in the thick, wet mud, positioned directly next to a pair of heavily scuffed, standard-issue South Korean military combat boots, accompanied by a single, agonizingly raw, devastatingly brief caption that read, "We passionately sang about a beautiful world of dreamers, but we violently woke up to the deafening, horrific roar of our own destruction. Please, fiercely hold on to each other before the music completely stops." Boom. The sheer, unadulterated psychological destruction of that post violently crashed the Weverse service in less than 3 minutes, sending an unstoppable, paralyzing shockwave of pure, unfiltered existential dread and profound heartbreak across the entire globe. Let's aggressively, meticulously unpack the sheer, undeniable genius and the suffocating, paralyzing terror of this specific historical reaction. By deliberately placing the shattered microphone, the ultimate universal symbol of his massive, record-breaking global voice, his artistic soul, and his ability to unite millions across massive cultural divides, in the filthy, violent mud next to the heavy boots of a soldier, Jungkook was executing an absolute masterclass in deeply intellectual, profoundly emotional, anti-war visual storytelling. He was violently, unapologetically illustrating the horrifying, indisputable fact that mechanized global warfare actively, brutally murders art, silencing the youth and crushing the beautiful, fragile dreams of an entire generation under the heavy, unforgiving march of military boots. The internet absolutely, completely lost its mind. Within a staggering 15 minutes, the massive hashtags, "The Fallen Dreamer," Jungkook's shattered mic, and "Hold On to Each Other" completely and violently overtook the aggressive, bloodthirsty war propaganda, heavily boosted by terrifying geopolitical algorithms, absolutely dominating the #1 worldwide trends across X, TikTok, Instagram, and even major international news outlets. You have to realize the incredibly heavy, deeply layered parasocial architecture at play here. For millions of terrified Gen Z and millennial youths currently watching their geopolitical future violently disintegrate before their very eyes, Jungkook is not just a singer, he is their exact contemporary, a fellow 20-something navigating a terrifying, broken world. To see the ultimate symbol of their generation's success violently admit that the dream is currently being destroyed by the senseless, bloody decisions of untouchable, heavily armored politicians and out-of-touch
billionaires playing God with international borders is a tragedy so profound it literally defies modern articulation. Fans immediately began frantically circulating old, heartbreakingly euphoric videos of his massive, surprise Times Square performance in New York City, violently contrasting the beautiful, roaring cheers of the American public with the terrifying, stomach-churning reality that the U.S. military is now heavily mobilizing for a massive, catastrophic Middle Eastern conflict that deeply threatens his own safety in the South Korean military. The absolute psychological dissonance of this reality completely fractured the global consciousness, triggering a massive, unprecedented wave of emotional responses. Sociologists, military historians, and digital behavior analysts, rapidly analyzing the massive, explosive viral spread of this post, noted that Jungkook's stark, muddy image served as a profoundly necessary, massive digital wake-up call to a completely traumatized global youth in a world violently screaming about tactical airstrikes, nuclear threats, and economic collapse. The youngest member of BTS offered a massive, quiet, and deeply philosophical sanctuary of shared mourning. He brutally reminded the terrified, doom-scrolling masses that beneath the heavy, suffocating uniform of the artillery soldier still beats the profoundly empathetic, deeply wounded heart of a global dreamer who was utterly sickened by the senseless violence of the world. The sheer, unadulterated terror of watching the vibrant, relentlessly passionate Golden Machni actively acknowledge the terrifying possibility of the music completely stopping, violently galvanized the global fandom into unprecedented action, sparking massive, coordinated international peace rallies and completely crashing international humanitarian donation sites in his name within hours, as the terrifying reality of the U.S.-Israel-Iran war violently escalated throughout the week, causing massive international blockades and sending global markets into an absolute terrifying freefall. That haunting image of the shattered microphone in the mud became a massive, undeniable global symbol of the enduring, desperate human resistance against the absolute ugliness of war. It was an incredibly dramatic, deeply suspensive, and profoundly tear-dropping reminder that even in the absolute darkest, most terrifying trenches of human conflict, the sheer, unyielding power of art, empathy, and raw, unfiltered human vulnerability can still violently cut through the deafening noise of destruction. Decades from now, when military historians and cultural analysts meticulously dissect the digital, psychological fallout of this horrific global crisis, Jungkook's incredibly stark, deeply poetic, and utterly devastating reaction will absolutely, unequivocally stand as a towering, unshakable monument to the fierce, undeniable power of absolute artistic integrity in the face of mechanized global violence, definitively cementing its legendary, chilling spot on this list as the absolute most intellectually profound, culturally significant, and undeniably internet-breaking moment in the entire modern history of global pop culture.
And there you absolutely have it, guys. The sheer, undeniable, and utterly terrifying reality of how the 7 biggest global icons on the entire planet completely brought the internet to a suffocating, paralyzing standstill during one of the darkest, most terrifying geopolitical chapters in modern human history. When the absolutely catastrophic news of the United States and Israel violently clashing with Iran officially broke, plunging the global economy into a terrifying freefall and threatening millions of innocent lives with the horrific, apocalyptic nightmare of a multi-front World War III, the world didn't just look to heavily armored politicians or out-of-touch billionaires for comfort. They desperately, instinctively looked to BTS. From Jin's heartbreakingly quiet plea for a single safe morning under the stars, to RM's devastatingly intellectual use of historically tragic Korean art, and Yoongi's brutally uncompromising, fiercely raw indictment of the powerful elites playing God with human trauma, we witnessed the horrifying, stomach-churning psychological impact of war actively murdering joy through J-Hope's completely silent, violently grayed-out dance studio, and we felt the overwhelming, tear-jerking power of radical empathy when Jimin's massive, leaked humanitarian donation and agonizing, tear-stained voice note successfully mobilized millions of dollars for innocent children trapped in the bloody crossfire. We were completely paralyzed by the sickening, terrifying duality of Taehyung violently contrasting the lethal, heavy reality of his special duty team deployment with the beautiful, fragile plea of vintage jazz and wild roses. And finally, we were utterly shattered by Jungkook's catastrophic, deeply symbolic image of his smashed global microphone violently drowning in the military mud, heavily cementing the horrifying reality that mechanized warfare actively, brutally silences the dreams of an entire generation. These 7 incredibly distinct, profoundly deeply emotional, and historically monumental reactions violently cut through the deafening, toxic noise of algorithm-boosted war propaganda, providing a massive, undeniable digital sanctuary for millions of terrified Gen Z and millennial youths across the globe. They proved, without a single shadow of a doubt, that even when the absolute darkest, most terrifying trenches of human conflict threatened to violently swallow the planet whole, the sheer, unyielding power of art, radical empathy, and raw, unfiltered human vulnerability can still violently ignite a massive, unstoppable wave of global solidarity. But now, the terrifying, agonizingly real question heavily remains, as the geopolitical chessboard continues to violently burn and these 7 artists remain actively entrenched within their grueling mandatory military service under the terrifying shadow of a global conflict. What happens next? Will the absolute deafening roar of military artillery permanently drown out the music? Or will the massive, unprecedented global movement ignited by these 7 internet-breaking moments successfully force the hands of global leaders to finally choose humanity over destruction? What deep hidden messages are we still violently missing in their digital footprints? And how will this catastrophic global timeline fundamentally, irrevocably alter the highly anticipated 2025 reunion of the biggest band in the world? You guys absolutely need to sound off in the comments down below right now, because we are actively reading every single one of your theories in this terrifying, unpredictable timeline. If your mind was completely blown and your heart was shattered by this deep investigative dive into the most historic internet-breaking reactions of the decade, you absolutely must violently smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you never miss an emergency update, and share this video everywhere to keep the conversation fiercely alive. The world might be shaking right now, but the army stands absolutely unbroken. Stay safe, intensely hold on to each other, and we will see you in the next monumental breakdown.